We're happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have everyone here.
Thank you for your generosity.
Of course.
All right, let him talk.
That's all right, no worries. But yeah, welcome everyone to Mount Golion. If you want, we can all head out to the back porch and we can kind of get started. Does anyone need to use the restroom before we begin? You do? Okay. I'll show you where it is downstairs. Yeah, it's just right here.
I need it too.
Okay.
Wow. It's like colony 1900.
Why don't you do that?
Barbara, just leave it in the van. And she locks the door.
No, I don't want
She
to bring
insists.
it.
She insists. It's a safety pack. And let me tighten it.
Oh, okay.
Like you made your safety pack.
I was going to leave mine in the car, but mine's lighter. And yeah.
No, it'll be alright. It won't come out.
I love the doors. They're so regal. Regal.
Can I have it so I can tighten it so it's not hanging?
Oh, good stairs. If Arthur was here, he would not be doing stairs. Yeah. Arthur, the other one that sits next to me in school.
Oh, I did. Oh,
You
yeah.
met him, remember?
Oh,
He's
with the
also-
hat.
Yeah.
Oh, he was a kid there, I know.
Yeah. Oh, it's like a writer's desk. That's a big, huge back door. I like the beams. They're really old. This would be nice to sweep. I guess that's like an entryway of the home. And then you have like a shelf. Bookshelf.
Wait till you reach 65. You'll be really...
At 65, I'm not carrying my purse. Or if I do carry a purse, it's gonna be really light.
I remember those days, Mom.
What?
Staff only.
You did? You need them, right? Okay.
Ooh. Dinner, anybody?
57, yeah.
Hello, huh?
This is Molly. Right here.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
You and I
Yes.
spoke over-
Yeah.
Okay, this is Gabriel.
I don't want that for you.
Gotta be a proper young lady.
Ooh, look at the view, guys.
Oh, look at that.
Wow.
Man, this is beautiful.
Rockers. Nice view. I would love to wake up every morning and have coffee out here and just relax.
Well, then make that your goal.
Get me a rich husband, I would. Oh, look at the old-fashioned little house. And then you got like the windows here. Thumbs this video up, please. Every subscriber. This is definitely history of Hudson Valley. So yeah.
Okay. All right. This wax over here.
I like it. A plane.
Yeah, so again, welcome to Mount Golion. I'm happy everyone is here today. So a little bit about the history of the house and the site that we're on today. Originally, the land was owned by Native Americans, and so even all the way dating back 7,000 years ago to around 6,000 BC, Native Americans used these grounds as kind of like a summer camp for the young Native American children. And it wasn't until way later on, until around 1610, that there was a man he was from what was called Holland. Today it's the Netherlands, so they were a Dutch family. And they came over looking for ways to make money in America. At the time, the two big ones were the beaver fur trades and wood. So today, not as much beaver fur trading, but still plenty of wood. So those were the two things that they kind of came over looking for to try to make some money for the family. So it was later on, a couple years later, in 1683, that there was a man named Golion Verplank. So Golion is the namesake, as we would say, of the household. So he came over from Holland with two other men, and they signed the land patent, and they purchased the property from the Native Americans. So they purchased 85,000 acres of land and split it between three men. So
I don't know how you do
I
that.
don't think anyone needs that much land, but The water
Why
married.
not? Maybe your own property, Mom. So why not anybody here?
Yeah.
My father-in-law had a problem like that. He used to come.
Barbara, let the guy talk.
It's no worries. So the family who lived in the household, they were the Verplank family, and they were a very, very wealthy family. So, has anyone ever heard of people like John D. Rockefeller?
Yes.
Vanderbilt?
Vanderbilt.
History school, history class.
Yeah. So people of that kind of size and wealth, they were just as wealthy as them, just a little bit before their time. So they made a lot of money in the beaver fur trading, in the sale of wood, and also later on they got into politics and became people that were in the government. So they were able to make a lot of money and have things like this beautiful property. So when the house was built in 1730, the family originally used it as like a summer home because they lived down in New York City, right on Wall Street. So yeah. So it wasn't until 1884 that the family moved into the house full time. So what the family would do is they lived down in New York City, and whenever they wanted to come up and visit the home, all they had to do was jump on a boat, ride up the Hudson River, and then walk right up the yard, up the porch, and into the house.
So that
Convenient.
was all cleared, probably.
Yeah.
Back
So
in the day.
yeah. So back then, the family had direct access to the river. Today we keep it closed off a little bit,
Yeah.
but the family had direct access to the river. They had boats. They had a dock down there. They had a boathouse. So what they would do is they would just sail the boat up from New York City, and then once they landed right here, they would just walk up the yard, up the porch, and home sweet
Was
home.
there trains back then?
So not originally. The train system didn't get brought in until the mid 1800s. So around 1860, I want to say.
Oh, that's when it came with trains? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So what happened was originally the train wasn't there, so the family could walk right down to the riverfront.
Nice.
But in 1860, when the MTA was created, they came to the family and said, "Hey, we'll have to put a railroad on your property. Is that okay?" And the family said, "No, it's our property. We don't want to have commercial trains running through
Oh,
our
wow.
grounds." They said, "Too bad," and they built it anyway. Yeah.
Good
So
thing they did.
so nowadays we have the train down there, so it's a beautiful view of the river, but we keep the trees there just so that no one wanders down. Because when they built the train system, they had to cut into the rock shelf, so it doesn't seem like it, but there's actually a really steep drop down to the river. And looks can be deceiving because where we're standing right now, we are a good half mile away from the river. Yeah, it looks a lot closer than it is.
Probably gets a lot of vegetation.
Yeah, it is. But we always have a nice view. It's nice to have. Does anyone have any questions for me? No questions? Alright.
When they first came out with trains, I was wondering about that.
It was 1850 or the mid 1860s.
Yeah, so it was around 1860 when the MTA was put in right here. Trains before then would have been a little bit earlier, around 1830, I want to say.
Yeah.
With like the Transcontinental Railroad really being that first big one, stretching across what was then the United States. A little smaller than today.
Yeah, like.
So they spoke Dutch living here, right?
So they spoke Dutch and English. So as the years went on, the family developed their English better and kind of left the Dutch behind.
Mm.
But yeah. But there are still some Dutch remnants around the house and things like that. One of the popular ones was that back then in Dutch they didn't use the letter U, they used the letter V.
It's like in German, same thing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, we don't use that either.
And it's because the V stands out more.
Mhm.
For people who aren't used to the characters of English, they see U as like a half circle. They're like, that looks weird.
Yeah.
But you see a V, it's strong, it stands out. So they used to use it. So if anyone read the sign when at the front door while you guys came in, that's why it had V's on it instead of U's. Because they used the V back then, because it stood out more. Yeah.
Same thing with W. You pronounce it with a V.
This way, right?
Yeah, so what we'll do now is we'll head downstairs. And that was originally the kitchen of the household.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's big pies.
We're going downstairs. You got it, girl? You got the stairs, right?
What was the thing about the rosary? I would love to go there sometime.
Where?
In Poughkeepsie.
Restroom, gift shop down the stairs.
Just hold on to the rail. Oh, it's only a couple stairs, really.
No, Arthur would not like this.
You don't like stairs?
You see how he walks? No. Anyone with a bad leg or foot or tendonitis, wow. It definitely sounds like a basement. I saw propane or fuel or gas or fuel oil. Well, we can always have a church service here. That bathroom doesn't even match the house.
What are we doing down here?
We're looking at stuff.
Oh, we're
More of a tour.
I guess they did not have tall women like myself back then. Because, like, if I was any taller, my head would hit the ceiling. Molly, I'm like, oh, Dutch cupboard. The door. Thumbs up the video. Ooh, photos. Oh, I know what that is. Spinning wheel.
This was
The cell.
originally the kitchen of the household. So what they would do is they would have their food prepared down here, and they would use this large stone structure right here. Now, the technical name for it is a hearth. That's the Dutch name for oven. And the way that this big thing would work was that, you know, nowadays we have those nice ovens in our homes, in our apartments that we can cook right in. Back then, they didn't have that. So what you would do is down on the ground here, you would put coals or wood or any type of heat source on the ground, and then they would use this right here, which is the Dutch oven. Yeah.
I reminisce that
Now
one.
people sometimes wonder, how could you control the heat level? Because it's dangerous to build a fire all the way up here. That's where these come in. So the Dutch oven itself is suspended on this arm. Now if you wanted something to just keep it warm or to simmer, you would keep it up here. But if you needed some real high intensity heat, all you had to do was just attach these hooks
Oh, wow.
and bring the pot down to the fire. That way you didn't have a huge fire going and then could burn the house down. So
Nice.
yeah, so a couple of neat little inventions like that.
Makes being a housewife easier.
And then another nice invention that they had inside the hearth was this structure in here.
Oh, like an oven, like for like bread.
Exactly.
Right.
Pizza.
Yeah.
Pizza.
Yeah, nowadays we see them used as like a pizza oven.
Yeah,
It's
pizza,
essentially-
yeah.
It's like a brick oven. It works the same way. The inside of it is made of bricks.
Really cook like meat and stuff in there?
Mm-mm.
More so for the pan, probably.
Yeah.
Usually for meat, they would put it inside the pot. They didn't really grill back then. It was really just cooking it. Yeah. So what they would do is they would cook things like bread in there, pastries. They could do like meat pies in there, because that was popular back then. Yeah, that's what they would use that for. And then, yeah, this was the oven for the household. Yeah.
Just think about it. People used this space before, like, way back when.
Yeah, so,
Like real people.
so the hearth has been here for coming up on what? 300 years almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they probably tuck their dresses in, the women, to cook because you would not want to catch on fire.
Yeah, so that's something I point out to people too is, you know,
Yeah.
it was women who worked down here, the men didn't. So
They were outside, probably.
Yeah. And I always give the women a ton of credit because they didn't dress like us today. They wore long flowing gowns and had to walk right here with an open fire. So they had to keep mindful of the food, of the fire, their own dress and clothing.
And the children.
I always give them a ton of credit.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Emily's goal is to be a housewife.
Yeah, so
Yes, my goal is to be a housewife.
those were used for making the yarn, for sewing, and for things like that. Yeah. So nowadays, today, they're all mechanical, or they have like a foot pedal that keeps the wheel spinning. Back then, they didn't have that. So it was a kind of a two-person job. What you would have is one person on one end, right here. There's a little spool here to make sure that the yarn can spin. And on the other side, someone would spin the wheel to feed the yarn through.
That is too much.
So yeah.
It just keeps going like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you give it a nice push, sometimes it'll keep going, but you don't want to spin it too fast because then while this person's trying to do everything nice and concise, then they're just going to keep getting it and it'll keep falling. So
And I'll mess up the clothing.
yeah. So it's a two-person job. You had to make sure. And if you spin it too hard, then it just rocks back and forth. So it takes a lot of practice.
Jeopardy, anybody? Jeopardy, we spin the wheel?
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, Jeff.
Yeah.
What's over here?
Yeah, so then we also have this stone structure here.
I love stone.
So this was not used as a fireplace, and we know that because if you look up top there, there's no flue network, as we call it. That's the way that the smoke can escape through the chimney. That doesn't exist in here. So the reason for this being built was it was built for the structural integrity of the home. So it was for weight-bearing purposes. Yeah, so when the family built the house, they did the research all the way dating back to those ancient archaeologists from Rome, from Greece, and found that this size, the width, the depth, this curve here was the best for bearing weight. Now, it was good that they did their research because there was a fire in the home in 1931
Boy.
that burned everything above us to the ground. Yeah. So the ground floor and the top floor burned to the ground, and everything from up there collapsed into the basement.
Oh,
And the only
jeez.
things that survived the fire were the walls of the basement, this stone structure, the hearth, and the chimneys.
Just because of this arch.
Yep.
And the stone, probably, right?
Yeah, so the stone wouldn't have burned, but all of the weight that crumbled from the top could have easily destroyed it if it wasn't structurally sound. But
Wow.
yeah, so you'll see inside, you do see burn marks in there. And people will say, wait a minute, you said there was no fireplace in there. And I said, there was a fire.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those are left over from the fire almost 100 years ago. And the other thing about the fire, too, was that in 1804, when the family moved in full-time to the home, they built an extension to the house. And you'll see photos of that in a little bit. But for reference, think about how big the house is right now. The extension was twice as large. It was even bigger. But when they built it completely out of wood. So when the fire happened, the entire thing disappeared.
Is that a birdhouse or something?
So this actually is not a birdhouse. This is a squirrel house.
Really? Wow.
Yes. So back then, in the 1800s, if you had a pet squirrel, it was a sign of wealth.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the modern day equivalent would be, now sometimes people have like pet tigers.
Yeah.
You see that? It's like, if you're gonna have a pet tiger, you gotta have the money to support it.
Yeah.
But it's one of those, like, you think of it as a wild animal, you don't think of it as a cat or a dog that you snuggle up with at night, right? Yeah. Having something like a squirrel as a pet, you don't really think of it. But for the times in the 17 and 1800s, that was something that a lot of wealthy people had as pets.
And they had
Would
dollhouses,
it
too.
bite them?
And they had the big ones too.
Yeah, the replica of their
The
home.
squirrels,
Like, did they not really touch them, probably?
oh, they touched them.
Oh, wow.
We have portraits. I'll show
Are
you.
they
one.
trained to be touched? Or so wild?
They couldn't train them. They were still really wild. It's not like a dog or a cat where you can teach them tricks and things. But yeah,
Yeah, I
they
wonder
would.
if they bit them frequently.
Or scratched them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how about this behind you, the cabinet thing there?
Yeah, so
Oh,
these
it's
are
a
kind of,
cabinet.
yeah, I was blocking that. Sorry. So these are kind of just some recreations of kind of what the pottery and the silverware would have looked like for the times.
Cool,
So,
nice.
for example, this would be your standard. They've seen better days. But this is kind of what your plate, your fork, and your knife looked like back then.
Oh, that's a plate, a fork, and a knife?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's some big cutlery.
Big
Yeah.
portions.
Mm-hmm.
It looks what it looks like.
When you have money, you can eat good.
That's very true.
Yeah. See, this is just some pieces that are the pottery and other little things that they would have back then.
Learning.
Well, this is considered baking your plate.
Yes.
Are there a lot of rich people baking it right
These
now?
are just big foot
I'm
pieces.
sure there are.
There are, yeah.
What's your name?
My name's Gabriel.
Hi, Gabriel. Nice to meet you.
Is that a gift store right there?
Yeah, so we do have the gift shop, so if anyone wanted to swing by later on, we could do that.
Can I just take a peek right quick?
Yeah.
Can we finish our lovely tour for your shop?
Matt lives
They
in
got
Rochester
squirrels
Falls.
still. Right.
Oh yeah, they had the squirrel.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's it?
How much is it?
Alright.
It's cool.
So we go back upstairs.
Yeah, so what we'll do is I'll take everyone upstairs. We'll head to the dining room of the household.
Okay.
Romantic, the dining room.
There's two bathrooms. Sorry. I'll go for it. I'll go for Oh, you want me to go? You go first. I'll be there for support.
Hold a month on my mind.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the white was the original color of the walls, or
So
did they
the
paint?
white, we painted the walls white, so, and I'll tell everyone about this a little bit in the dining room, but we did have to rebuild the house, and that was something that was done later on.
Oh wow.
But
Because
yeah,
it
so-
burnt to the ground.
Well, I mean, I just thought if they had paint back then, or I mean, it's a nice color scheme. White's cheerful and makes it clean cut, and yeah,
Right.
I'm sure there's probably a darker stone, or you know.
Yeah, the stones
Good
I
job,
believe would have been left in the original color.
Wow. It's similar to being German because I'm German descended, so a lot of the words, the similarities, not the same, but
Yeah,
we pronounce some, a little different.
there's a lot of similarities. between
Yeah.
the two. So we'll head into the room on our left-hand side here.
Well, Kasha, what is this here?
Thumbs up the video.
Yeah, so these are books.
Well, way back then?
Yeah, so
Talking to me?
they love the art.
No, I'm listening.
Drawing, painting, literature, books, things like that. So they would collect books from all over the world, from all different time periods. So these are just kind of some original books.
Very nice. And that over there is what?
Hold on. I'm gonna. Where is the smoking area? Can you just go outside?
So it would be outside. If you want, I'll show you where.
Yeah, I just want.
He's the only smoker here, so. They just
So does everyone want to have dinner and have a Shabbos meal? I'm down.
It's more than remember when we went to that art place with the cars on that.
Oh, pictures. I was going to say, let's turn on the lights, but they don't have lights in. They had candles back then.
You ever see the people dressed up as little French soldiers? About
Yeah, New Paltz, on Huguenot Street.
Fort Stanwix.
What?
Fort Stanwix.
Thumbs up this content. Oh, yeah,
It's during
education.
the Revolution, so this is very similar to that kind of stuff.
The Van Pleichen Room. I'm trying to translate in German. Metropolitan Museum of Art.
That's near Fort Stanwix is near Oriskany.
Ooh, not the country Columbia.
Oriskany is where.
Is it okay if I squeeze
Oh,
by?
sorry.
Well, look at the pictures. Are lots of people who used to live here?
Yeah, these.
Be quiet, guys.
Was the husband, was he a senator or something?
Well, he was just a wealthy businessman.
A wealthy businessman.
Yeah.
What are these pictures up here?
Trading.
So these.
The Rum Mouth Planet.
So
Wow, the house, the original.
Yeah.
The family was graciously able to take a lot of their belongings out of the house because the fire lasted about 3 hours. It was
Oy.
a very slow burning fire, so they were able to take a lot of their belongings. So whether it be the chairs, the clothing, artwork, and things like that.
While it was burning, they like came in and.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it was a really slow burning fire. So they were able to recover a lot of their belongings, and what ended up happening was our site kind of laid in ruins, as they would say, right? Just overgrown grass and bricks for about 35 years. So in the meantime, what the family did was they donated those belongings to the Metropolitan Museum of Art down in New York City. And in the American wing of the museum, the Verplank family has their own room. So if anyone's ever down there and they're in the museum and they see a room that looks kind of like this,
Yeah, pretty room.
remember us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happened. So this was the dining room of the household. So the food would be prepared downstairs and then brought up here to be eaten.
What is this here?
So a couple pieces of chinaware.
China ware. Those are nice chandeliers too.
Yeah, family loved their chinaware.
Yeah,
That was,
yeah.
you know, sometimes when people travel, there's always
Yeah.
the one thing they always look for. They always looked for china. It was
Nice.
something that they liked.
Oh, so this is a bit of what it used to look like.
Yeah.
Now there's a picture of the fire and how they took a picture of it.
So the photo in the middle here, this is the original house. This is the reconstruction that we're in today. This was the extension. So you can see how it was a lot larger.
You guys did a good job redoing this though. It looks exactly like it.
Yeah. So a little bit about the reconstruction. So what happened was, like I said, it was about 35 years that if anyone came here, all they saw was overgrown trees with some brick columns. But it wasn't until the late 1960s that a man came in to recreate the house. His name was Beisch Bleecker. A little bit about Beisch. He is the grandson of a woman named Virginia Eliza Darby Verplank. She is the little girl in the portrait behind you.
What was her name?
Virginia Eliza Darby Verplank.
What a name.
That's a Darby. I can't.
Darby Verplank, like D-A-R-B-Y.
How about the
And I thought
china?
German was
That's
difficult.
nice
That's the
china.
same
That is
china.
beautiful china.
Nice Dutch cupboard.
So there
That is
were no
beautiful.
firefighters? Like there were.
There
but-
were,
Oh,
but since the
beautiful
fire
shot.
was in 1931, it wasn't like today when you can just
Different
dial 911 real quick.
thing.
It's kind of like a ghost.
Wow, look at the fire remains. Look at that. That's a little, that's scary.
Fire trucks back then.
Oh,
So, and also at that point, the house was 200 years old. The family may not have sought the need to put the fire out. The only person who was living here at the time was Virginia herself.
Oh.
And she also owned property in Beacon as well. So when the fire broke out, Virginia wasn't home. So there was no one here, so we don't exactly know how the fire started because the people in the newspaper who wrote about it had
Them.
different reports about who they said did it. And even to this day, we still don't know who caused the fire.
Are they? Oh, I wouldn't lean on that roll. Are they trying to say that it would what's it called? Like a person made the fire?
Yeah,
Like that
so-
was one of their.
Really? That's sad. Back then they would do that.
They believed it was an arsonist. Yes, that's it. So that's what happened.
Children.
We just know that the fire happened. We don't know exactly who started it or why. We just know that it happened. But then, so what happened was when Beisch came in to rebuild the site, he wanted to recreate the Mount Golion in the state that it was in when the Revolutionary War happened.
Wow.
Because we have a connection to the Revolutionary War. And at the time that he built it at what was called the Bicentennial. And the Bicentennial was the celebration of America's 200th birthday. So with our connection to the Revolutionary War, Beisch wanted to rebuild the site in order to have our grounds and our doors up and running for that celebration. So on the board over in the back corner there, those are some photos during the reconstruction process. So those large photos you see on the left-hand side, those are kind of what the site looked like after the fire.
Oh my, well, you were definitely right about the whole brick remaining. There's nothing left but the two bricks, like you were saying. Wow.
Well, how well off were they to do? Millionaires, right?
Well, the people who originally owned it, they had died off, basically, except for one third. Except for one person. Was Virginia ever married?
Virginia was married.
She had a lot of children?
I forget offhand how many children Virginia had.
But she was the only one living here, but with her like spouse, or
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened was kind of at the beginning of the story, if you want to consider it that, the family used it as like a vacation home, and then they moved in full time, and then it was towards the end of the 1800s, going into the 1900s, the family started kind of going their separate ways. People had enough money
Aw.
to purchase their own homes, so the residents kind of moved back into like a part-time home, with Virginia being the only one living here. And it was mostly if anyone was in town and needed a place to stay.
And this is another fireplace?
Yeah, so this is a fireplace here. And this one we do know was a fireplace because it had the, we call
What's
it,
the candles
Stott.
down there? What are the candles? There's candles down there.
it's a nice view.
For decoration,
Oh,
and
really?
also maybe
Oh, I
Maybe
see,
that was
yeah,
lit
yeah.
sometime.
I wonder how they mopped these floors back then. The women like soap and water.
It took a long time, probably.
I think instead of mopping, they did it by hand. Because using a lot of water and soap on hardwood floors.
Mold?
Because they didn't, you'd have to worry about mold or wood rotting even
Oh
quicker.
wow.
Because they didn't put like varnish or anything on them. These are solid wood planks.
Wow.
So
So just a lot of sweeping,
a
clearly.
lot of sweeping, and if you saw something that needed to really be cleaned up, then that's on the ground with your hands. Yep.
Did they ever travel to Poughkeepsie, New York from here?
Yeah.
Probably.
Probably like business in Poughkeepsie.
Do they have a horse and carriage? Or a buggy? I don't know what they would call
did
it.
have a horse on the property at one point in the family's history.
Hmm.
Yeah. So they had a few animals here. They had some pets and things like that.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, tigers here does pets.
yeah. Sorry, what was that?
They had tigers as a pet too.
No.
Yeah.
Little squirrels.
How did they open the windows up to get fresh air in the home, like for spring or?
Yeah. So the way that the windows used to work.
Curious.
These are still the old school windows.
Uh-huh.
Is these little beams here.
Okay.
Open them. That's how that works.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So they only open from the inside.
How do they keep cool during the hot summer days?
It's a good
Yeah,
question.
it is.
A lot of fanning.
So they didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have fans.
Oh
They
yeah.
had to do the old school
Oh really?
clap the hand or have one of those paper things.
People came up there in paper.
Yeah. That's how it worked back then. They didn't have AC units like we have today.
Yeah.
So like I said, I mentioned earlier, I promised I would show you guys a photo of someone with a pet squirrel.
Yes.
And here it is.
Oh my
This is
goodness.
Daniel Cromwell for fun. This was a portrait done of him with his little pet squirrel.
It's like, did they put a leash on it?
There are multiple different reasons, but like you said, yeah, they could use it to wash up either before bed or before dinner or after dinner and things like that.
How do you know about all this stuff?
Next room.
Look at him, so precious.
Oh.
No, that's cool stuff.
Kind of cross into the room here.
I like this. This is really nice.
Yeah.
No, I love history and just
Me too.
to see what people lived. It scares me though because that door or this door.
They go to the same
But
room.
it's better than
Oh.
holding it.
Either go.
No, I guess I got this one.
Yeah, bro. What are those books for?
Wow. It reminds me of the Mormons with the FLDS because back in that era.
So if anyone wants to, you are free to grab a seat. And I'm moving on. So if anyone wants to grab a seat, you can feel
All you need is Warren Jeffs. All the prophecies. Barbara.
Not to fall into it. You don't want to break it, alright? Let's not do that.
You plop like a young woman very lightly,
Yes.
very gracefully.
So I'll tell everyone a little bit about our Revolutionary War connection. So as you may remember, the Revolutionary War was that war fought between America and Britain for America's independence.
4th of July.
What we had here at Mount Golion was a little unique situation. So there were two reclaimed family members living in the home at the time of the Revolution. Their names were Samuel and Judith, and they were married. But they were having a little bit of problems at home because Samuel was in favor of American independence. We call him a patriot. Meanwhile, Judith, she didn't want American independence. She liked Britain. She liked the idea of Britain controlling America. So the two decided it would be best if they spent some time away from each other. So she moved back down to New York City and lived in the home down there.
Wow.
And Samuel lived up here. Now, what happened during the Revolutionary War a lot of the times were these wealthy families would donate money or would donate their property to whatever side of the war they favored. And that happened here. So Samuel donated Mount Golion, back then it was just a house, wasn't a museum, but he donated his home to what was called the Continental Army. Those were the American soldiers. And he said to them, whatever you need the house for the war, you can have it, you can use it. So this gentleman here in the portrait, who looks a lot like George Washington, but he's not George Washington. Yeah. So
They probably always wore wigs back then, the men, right? Was
yeah,
that
so those
if
were
you had
the
money?
powdered wigs.
Wow.
So he has a long name, so bear with me. His name was General Frederick Wilhelm von Steuben.
Ooh.
Yes. So he was from Prussia, which is modern day Germany. So his job was, before he came to the U.S., he was a teenage soldier. So if anyone in Europe needed someone to go fight in a war for them, that's your guy. He would do it. So what happened was, in the beginning of the Revolutionary War, America was losing very badly because our soldiers were not soldiers. They were farmers who were playing war.
Yep.
So what happened was, George Washington went to Ben Franklin and said, we need people to train our troops properly, and we need to get on top of our game so that we can win this war. So he sent Ben Franklin over to Europe, and it was while he was in France that he ran into this gentleman here, von Steuben. He conducted a little bit of an interview with him, and that's when he found out this guy has a lot of knowledge. He knows a lot about the war and about the military. So he tells George Washington about him, and Washington says, send him over our way, he'll help us out. So he arrives at what was called Valley Forge. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but
I heard of it.
yeah.
In Pennsylvania, right?
Rhode Island.
Oh, right there.
Well, that's where he landed, was in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what happened was, Valley Forge had really bad weather conditions. It was a terrible winter. So the soldiers weren't properly trained, didn't have the best uniforms. So when he got there, he told Washington right off the start, you have to change this, 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 and this. And Washington said, that's why we hired you.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So he came in and immediately started making changes to the American army. And because of that, we were pretty successful. Some of the things he did, he taught the soldiers how to properly dress in military attire. Because prior to that, they were farmers. They didn't know how to properly wear a military uniform. On top of that, he taught them how to properly march, right?
Oh.
Seems like marching is an easy thing, right? You're just walking in a line. But if I'm walking in a line at this pace, and someone else is walking right next to me at a pace this fast, then it's all out of order. And that's how you get a lot of chaos going on. So he taught them how to properly march, taught them how to get into formations, so that when they went into battle, they knew who was by their side, so that they didn't think an enemy would be sneaking up on them, and so that they would know what to look out for when they're on the battlefield. So he does things like that. But yeah, so he was what we would call the drill master of the Continental Army. So right here on the grounds of Mount Golion, he would train some of the soldiers. And then when they were ready to fight, he would put them on a boat, send them across the Hudson River, and send them to General Washington. And what was called the Windsor Cantonment, which was where the soldiers lived that were stationed up here. So what happened was, when Samuel sacrificed the house, it was from 1782 to 1783 that von Steuben used Mount Golion as his headquarters. Yeah. So right to the end of the war, these were his headquarters.
Was that like between, like, I might be off a couple decades, but the red coat and the blue coat thing?
Yep, red coats and blue coats.
Confederates and right?
Yeah,
Or was that?
the red coats were the enemy.
I mean the British. The British were the red coats, right? And the blue coats were American. Okay, at least I got some part of
The
history.
whole Confederate. What was that for? What war?
Confederate Union's Civil War.
Okay.
The Civil War, you know.
Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah.
And these men over here.
Yep. So these look like a little bit more modern people.
Yeah.
They are.
Okay.
So what happened was, during the Revolutionary War, because there was no government or Congress that had a financial backing, so there was no one to back the war in terms of the United States. There was no money being moved around, which meant that when it came time for soldiers to get new shoes or new coats, it was their officer who was responsible for paying for that. Nowadays, we have funding, soldiers are funded, but back then they weren't. So what happened was it was their officers who would be responsible for paying for all of their soldiers' gear. Now what happened was it was with the promise that after the war ended that they would be paid back because they spent a lot of money on their soldiers. But the war ended, some time went by, and no one got their money back. So here at Mount Golion, there was something called the Society of the Cincinnati, and it was formed here at Mount Golion. What it did, it had two purposes. The first and foremost was it was used to group people together to get Congress to pay back the officers. Okay. So that was the first purpose, and then after they completed that goal, they chose to keep the society around as kind of like a brotherhood for those officers, and the society still exists to this day. So in order to be a member of the society back then, you had to be either an officer, since they were the ones who needed their money back, or an officer's son. Today, you can become a member of the Society of Cincinnati if you can prove you are a direct descendant of an officer from the Continental Army.
Wow.
So you have to be able to prove that it would probably be your, let's see, great, and then potentially great-grandfather was an officer.
Who goes to those lengths? Bless them.
I probably got about 20 of them. I'm related to everybody.
Oh.
It's always possible.
So I got it, just my mom died, and she's the one who knew all this stuff.
Yeah.
Was there a relief society for women? Like, what were the women doing then? Like, you think they made the coats or the, like, when the men were off, were they making the jackets or helping them?
That's a good question. I would assume so. Because since the men were off at war, it happens every time there's a war, that when the men are off fighting in the war, it's the women back home who pick up the slack and have to make up for the jobs that are now being done somewhere else.
They have to watch the kids.
Yeah. So it happened in the Revolutionary War, it happened in the Civil War, it happened in World War I, it happened in World War II, and it's happened in the wars ever since.
Well, God bless the men, because without them, we wouldn't be here.
Do you remember Rosie the Riveter? You can do it, or you can do it. It's like women were in factories making
Yeah.
plans.
But also thanks to the men, or we wouldn't be here. They're the ones that have fought the battles.
Well, yeah, you could argue.
Two-way street.
Alright.
But yeah, so the society was formed here. So the portraits of the men in the corner there, those are the former presidents of the New York branch of the Society of Cincinnati. Because we were the founding place for the society, and we are the New York State headquarters.
How did they use lights like this back in the
They
day?
did.
They had candles.
The windows are so big.
Yeah, sunlight.
Yeah, the windows and the candles were lighted back.
So the windows were like this back in the day?
Yeah. So what happened was when the house was rebuilt, that finished in 1975, it was built to be in the exact state the house was in back in 1775.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they were able to do that because the family had drawings, had detailed writings about the house itself, and then later on they had photographs. So
Wow.
they did a lot of research. The only main difference, besides the electricity in the house today, from the house back 250 years ago, was that right where Molly and I are, there would have been a wall. There would have been two separate rooms.
Oh, one for women, one for men, like smoking lounge. And
No!
Well, no, but they,
segregate men and women.
because back then that's what it was. Though there wasn't there some segregation. Didn't women have like
They just had different roles.
like I don't want to say a tea party, but like women had like would sit together, read books or whatever. Then men would have the smoking lounge.
Well, that was
Victorian
probably
maybe.
more in the future.
Was it? I don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't have that back then.
Molly's right.
Yeah, like
Oh.
more like in like the probably when like that's more of like it reminds me of like speakeasies and stuff like that.
The Edwardian era.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, do they still meet here?
They do.
What?
Yeah. So once a year,
Still meets here.
the New York branch of the society.
That is cool.
Yeah, so once a year they come here and they have their meeting.
What?
Who is that? Who is the society? Who is that?
He just went over explaining it. So he listened. Thank you.
So they were the people, they were the officers of the Continental Army. they had to buy all of their soldiers' gear for them because there was no government or Congress to fund it. So they had to pay out of their own pocket to pay for someone else's clothes, their shoes, and things like that, with the promise that after they would get paid back. But when the war ended, they didn't get paid back. So the society got formed to go to Congress to say, hey, give them the money back. And it worked. They got their money back.
That's great.
Yeah.
And they still meet here once a year.
Once a year?
Yes.
That's
Yeah. So anyone have any other questions?
no.
When could I have something, a question here?
Yes.
How old is this house?
So the actual house itself was finished reconstruction in 1975, which would make the house just shy of 50 years old.
Right, because it burned down.
So you can't count the original. If you count the original,
So the original structure, so like the walls of the basement downstairs and the two stone structures, those are from the original house from 1730. So those are almost 300 years old now.
Whew.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said men wore wigs back in the back during the American Revolution.
Yes.
Like, yeah. I know they did that in France too, probably, right? Wore wigs like that.
Yeah, so that was a thing that was common in Europe before America.
Yeah.
And then when the Europeans came over and settled home down here in America, that was something that they brought with them.
Yeah, I see that.
The powdered wig look still stuck around for, I'd say probably 25, 30 years after the American Revolution. Once the 1800s came, people said that's an old look. You don't want to wear that.
They wore that in Italy too, those wigs, or just in France?
France, England, sometimes Spain, depending on the families.
Yeah.
Italy would wear them. Italy stopped wearing them earlier than everyone else. That's where that curve started of America being a little bit ahead of the
oh,
back.
someone's visiting in the window.
Yeah. Let me see what's.
Oop. The tour is almost over.
You just have to go to the other room.
I could imagine cleaning these floors back then. I lose 30, 40 pounds real quick.
What?
I'm going out back.
Why don't you just stay here?
I'm going to smoke for a little bit. I'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to smoke. I'll be right back. I'm coming right back.
You better cut that down. In 10 minutes.
Downstairs real quick. So if you guys want to hang out here, you can. If you want to go to the next room we'll be in, it'll be the one that's on the left side of the back door.
Okay, good. Let's explore it. Yes, this one. Straight through.
So interesting. This was the basement, I think we were just at. Downstairs. It's crazy. Just the history of this place. I kind of like it though. It takes you back to something. Once upon a time. You said tuck it. I was like, tuck it. Who's?
Look at these little things.
Hey, a German. My people.
Flintlock pocket pistols.
The German Society of New York City founded General von Steuben in the administration of Mount Golion in Mai und 1697.
Is that golion, Gromlin, or plank?
I always wanted a photo of me like back in the olden days.
This right here.
Virginia Eliza Dubois Verplanck. Dubois? It sounds French. Or is it Dubois? I can't pronounce that. Dubra, I don't know. What names? Is her middle name French? Dubois? I'm thinking French maybe. I'm pronouncing it
Dubois
wrong.
is a French name.
I could thought so.
The Darby name that she has is from her father, who was not French.
Oh wow.
Right, it's a silhouette.
A little. Did she sit in that chair? I wonder.
No, he's out in the front. Okay, excuse me. Yeah. So And here we have a little bit more of the
Why is
connection.
it guns they used to use back in the day? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
It's okay.
is it guns they used to use way back in the
Yeah, so back in the Revolutionary War, they had the really long guns called muskets. And then,
Oh, the Winchesters.
yeah.
Winchesters?
Mhm.
They were heavy.
But then when the Civil War came around, that's when the smaller pistols came around.
Small pistol, what is it? What is it? You just got to squeeze it, put powder in it, and then squeeze it? Or?
Yeah.
It looks like it has the
Yeah.
trigger on the top.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's two very important individuals to the family and to the history of the house, and I'll tell you guys about them. So the first one was a man named James F. Brown. So James himself was originally an enslaved man from the state of Maryland. Yep. And that was in 1827. The man who had owned James had made a promise to him and said, "When I die, you will be a free man." The day came. James assumed that he was now free, but Mr. Williams, who was his owner, his mistress, Mrs. Williams, went back.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, that's how he was referred to in the letters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what happened was he went back on his deal, or she went back on his deal, I should say. And
Yeah, she
then-
was like, scratch that.
Yeah.
Huh.
And kind of said to James, "No, you are still an enslaved man. You are still my property."
Who's this?
But she had no papers.
Someone who was a part of the history of this house. He worked for someone that
Yep, he worked for the family.
he worked for the family. He was enslaved. They promised after death he would be free, but then the woman said, "No, never mind. I'm not going to free you."
So what happened was back in 1827,
Screwed up.
James decided to escape. So he made his
Who's
way.
you got a picture up there? Or you
Not in here. We actually don't have any photos of James, unfortunately. But what happened with James was he escaped Maryland and fled all the way up to Manhattan, and that is where he ran into a man named Daniel Cromwell Verplank. He was the boy in the little portrait with the little squirrel. That's him. Yep. So at the time, in 1827, slavery was not allowed in New York State. So James knew coming to New York, he would be a lot safer. So what ended up happening was he ran into Daniel, told him his story, and Daniel invited him to work for and live with the family in New York City. And he kind of became like a, what's the word for it? He was a Swiss Army knife, let's call him that. He worked a lot of jobs around the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he would help with the horses outside, he would help take care of stuff inside of the house. And yeah, so the story goes that we heard this from a Verplank family member, that they were hosting a dinner, and there was someone from the state of Maryland who recognized James and told Mrs. Williams about him. So Mrs. Williams says, "Okay, my escaped slave is in New York with the Verplank family." So what happened was he gets in contact with Mrs. Williams and says, "James lives with me, he works for my family, he is not a slave, he is a free man with free will." And because of that, Mrs. Williams got angry, they go back and forth, and they agreed that Daniel could purchase James' freedom for what was then $300. Today, that is around $10,000.
Huh?
So what happened?
That's horrid.
So Daniel pays the price and buys James' freedom. And James actually paid Daniel back every cent.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good man.
So then what happened was he was now a free man who lived with the Verplank family down in New York City. And then when the family moved back into the house full time, because remember how earlier I mentioned that the family had some roles in government and in politics? At the time, Daniel was a state senator, so he lived down in Manhattan. And what happened was when that term was done, the family moved back into Mount Golion, and they brought James with them. And James became the master gardener of the grounds.
No, that was the Williams family that brought him back?
That was, what did you say?
The Williams family?
No, the Williams family were the slave owners. It was the Verplank family, the family that lived here, that brought James back up here with them.
Okay.
Can you tell us who these pictures are?
He'll get there.
More of the Van Plank family.
Yeah, so that's
his daughter or something?
So this was Virginia. So remember the portrait of the little girl in the other room? This is her a few years later. Yeah. So James himself now was a free man, And what happened was he saved up money that he got from working from the Verplank family and purchased land in Beacon. And he used it as a like short-term rental place. So if anyone needed a place to stay, kind of a hotel before hotels. So he was a businessman. And what happened was now he was a man that was free and owned property. And in 1837, that is all you needed to do to vote. So every year on election day, James would go vote. And we know this because James kept a 40-year journal of his life.
What?
Yep.
You guys would have kept that, that would be very interesting, you know that?
It's probably somewhere.
Yeah, so it is in the National Heritage Museum. It is online if
Really?
anyone's ever interested.
Where's that located? In Manhattan, Brooklyn, something?
Good question. I want to say Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C.
Oh, Smithsonian?
Not the Smithsonian, but around there.
Yeah.
National Heritage.
Oh,
So James wrote a journal, so he would write things like that, and one of the things he wrote in his journal was about a birth of a new baby boy in the family, and that baby boy was this man here. His name's Robert. Yeah.
That was his son there?
So this man, not James' son, James didn't have any children, unfortunately, but this is Robert. His father was that man.
Really?
William Samuel. Yeah, so a little bit about Robert was he worked in the army. He was a lieutenant, so he was a high-ranking person during the Civil War. And he worked for what was called the USCT, which was at the time called the U.S. Colored Troops. So he was leading African-American troops for the Union, so the North, during the Civil War, which was very uncommon for a few reasons. One, he was a white male leading African-Americans, which wasn't popular at the time. And the other was that he came from a very wealthy family back then, and still sometimes today. Money can go a long way.
Yes, it can.
When people are being told that they have to go fight in the war, or we call it the draft, people back then could easily pay their way out of it. Robert, coming from a very wealthy family that had a lot of those connections, still said, no, I want to go fight for the right for freedom for all people. So Robert does that. He helps fight for the freedom of all men and women, dependent. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. So Robert does that, and then after that, he made a little bit of money because he was friends with John D. Rockefeller.
Oh.
So made a
Gotta make money with him.
little bit of money with Rockefeller.
Rockefeller was very rich back in that day.
Yeah.
I learned about him in elementary school.
Yeah. So he took that money, he purchased some farmland down in New Jersey, moved his family down there, and lived out the rest of his life.
Was there pioneers back in that time period?
Pioneers.
Like,
Not in this side of the country. So once
The West.
Yeah, so following the Civil War, getting more towards what was the 1870s, if anyone remembers the term manifest destiny.
No, what is that? What is that?
So manifest destiny was the name given to the time period where, what time period isn't correct, but the period where that's when Americans started moving westward, out towards California.
Utah, Arizona. Okay.
So things like the Oregon Trail, like if anyone remembers that old video game, the Oregon Trail.
I remember that where you shoot the deers and stuff like that. Like you go hunting and stuff, and you go like
the little log
different
cabins and
places,
stuff like that.
like
Yep.
the carriages, and you go like to different places and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That shit was fun.
So yeah, it was more later on. Up here, there were like
Got like double
lumberjacks.
bridges and stuff like that. Right? Yeah.
So yeah, like up here we did have like lumberjacks and things like that. But the pioneers were more westward, more towards like Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and things like that. But that was a little bit later. A few, I would say, like 20 years after the Civil War, because that's when now that the two different sides were again merged as one country. Then people said, okay.
And they had states back then at that time period?
Yep. So following the Revolutionary War, that's when states got created.
Okay.
Because originally they were just colonies,
Colonies, yeah.
pretty much the same thing as a state. But it wasn't until after the Civil War that people really said, okay, we are a country. Because even back then, before the Civil War, people didn't think of themselves as an American. They thought of themselves from where they were from.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we would say like, I'm not American, I'm a New Yorker. And someone from Connecticut would say like, I'm from Connecticut, I'm not American. But it wasn't until after
That's
the
interesting.
Civil War that people really started saying like, we are American, we come from the same land,
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
United.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
United States.
Yeah, I understand, right? You know, like,
Yeah. Anyone have any other questions?
What did the pioneers come over here? Like at that
When
time?
did they?
Yeah, like from Utah,
so-
Arizona.
They came from Europe.
Yeah, so they would have originally came from Europe, but that was something that, as the railroad system got better, especially with the transcontinental railroad,
Mm-hmm.
that helped mobility a lot more, so they could freely travel from the west coast to the east coast.
Well, I'm thinking, I know it's off topic, but being Mormon too, like I was trying to think like a polygamy and all that era. Was that after this time period, I wonder?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the settling of Utah wouldn't have been more until 1880, I want to say.
So this house wasn't well, it was still here. Okay.
Who's that picture of that portrait of him?
Yeah, so that is William Samuel Verplank.
what is that thing in your necklace right
Beep beep.
Oh, class.
I'm gonna run upstairs to grab it.
It's like a little
Okay.
dot. It's like a little dot.
We'll be right here. Yeah.
If anyone feels tired or yes, whatever. If anyone wanted to bring in on board, you don't want to make it walk down, I can do that. Some of them that are some pretty big ones. It might be easier for people to walk on this side.
Look, we're walking to our marriage. Where I was like, no, loco blanquita. No, nena, que tú haces la sienta la tuyo mierda. No, princesa. No, loca. No mierda. No mierda.
Look at this.
Ooh. Oh, it's like this runs like a country rodeo.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Woo! I could like have a club up in here. No.
Yeah, we got a straight on over this motherfucker, right?
To the windows. To the wall. To the wall. No, wow, this is huge. I ain't gonna lie, the wooden beams are gorgeous. Wow. Please thumbs up this video, every subscriber. It helps us out. Shall we? Have a dance. That's a big fan.
Wow. So that's This is really pretty.
So this would be for the horses and the animals?
Yeah, so a little bit of the backstory of the barn itself. It wasn't actually originally here.
Really?
It was located 15 miles east in Hopewell Junction.
15 miles.
Yeah, because the family had property all the way over there too.
So you have to drag the horse 15 miles to go park
They
it?
put them on. Well, remember the horses? They don't mind the 15-mile walk. Us humans, a little different.
Sheesh.
I like walking.
Yeah. But what happened was when that man Beish rebuilt the site in the 70s.
It's not good.
It's that natural.
It's that natural wood.
We cleaned. Yeah, we had our. If you guys saw the tall guy who was walking around, he cleans around here from time to time.
What does he clean with?
It's a good question. I don't know what kind of materials he uses. I know he uses the
I
brooms.
don't really know those questions.
Pledge.
Yes, sir.
Nah, he cleans. It smells real good in here all the time.
Yeah. So what happened was when Beish was rebuilding the site, he knew that the family owned the barn. So he went over to the guy and asked him and said, "Hey, I know there was the family barn. It's on your property. Can I have the barn?" And the guy said, at first, he said, "Well, it's on my property. I'm waiting for it to rot and fall apart and then sell the wood for whatever I can." So Beish said, "All right, name your price. I'll take the barn off your hands. All you have to do is just shake my hand and accept the money." So they agreed on $600 to purchase the barn, and that was back in the 70s. So today it's around $5,000 to $6,000. But what ended up happening was the man agreed. Beish paid $600 for the entire barn, and they literally labeled each and every plank of the barn, took the barn apart, shifted over here, and then rebuilt the entire barn. What? Yep. So the barn itself was built in 1720. So
Wow.
it's even older than the house.
Did it always have that?
No.
I doubt that.
So 1720 before it was deconstructed, or?
Yeah, so the barn was built in its original location in 1720,
Oh, okay.
and then was rebuilt on our site in the 1970s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of muscle.
He was like, "No, I need this barn.
Yep.
Good luck tearing it. I
Don't
don't
let
know
it
how
rot. I
they.
need it." That's literally what he
But yeah,
said.
so thankfully the barn was still in good condition. So all of the woodwork you see around us today, all original from 1720.
I believe it. You can. I don't know how the heck the Ben did this. Well, the Amish do it. So hey.
The only major differences with the barn were the lighting that was put in and the electricity, obviously the big fan.
Yeah.
But the only other main difference was they had to close up a hole in the barn. And it's on the front side of the barn. And it's, if you look at the top of the barn, you'll notice there's a little shelf there. There's some separation. Originally, if you wanted to peek underneath, you can.
I see it.
You'll see there's some non-colored wood. There's wood back there that's really light colored compared to the rest of the barn.
Yeah.
We covered that up because the family had some pretty unique ideas about how to keep things like bugs and rodents out of the barn. So if we look straight up and we look at the top of the ceiling, you see how there's those holes cut out up top there?
Yeah.
Unique ideas.
Those were intentionally put in so that small birds could fly into the barn and eat the bugs off of the vegetables. And then the larger hole that we had covered up was so that larger birds like owls could get into the barn and eat things like rats and mice. So they
Beats vacuuming. No.
So that's what they did. They were able to think of some nice ways to make sure that the animals were safe and that the crops wouldn't get destroyed from the bugs. So our barn is a historic Dutch barn, and the way that you can tell the Dutch barns apart from the others are what we call the H-frames. So if we look at the back of the barn and we look up, you see the letter H in the middle. So there's that, and then you see the letter H in the sides of the barn as well. And that's because they allow you to do different things with the space. So for instance, if you wanted to keep horses inside the barn, what you would do is you would bring your horse over, it would stay in a stall like this, and then what you would do is you would put wood planks up like this and block the horse in so that it couldn't escape. But at the same time, say you didn't have a horse, but you had a smaller animal like a pig
Or a donkey.
goat, or a donkey. What you would do is then you would take out this support beam up here, and you could move it down and create a smaller stall. Keep the animals in that way. And then also if you had vegetables, you could keep them in here as well. But the stalls on the side, the H-frames really allow you to kind of customize and use the barn however you want.
Is the H-frame where the door is too?
So there is technically an H-frame there. So yes, there is technically that H-frame and then the three big ones in the middle. And if you look straight up, you'll see how there's those three wooden logs that are stretched across.
Yeah.
That's because what you would do is you would put wood planks up there, create a floor, and then anyone who wanted to could sleep inside the barn. You'd create like a loft up there. So anyone who worked in the barn, whether they wanted to take a midday afternoon nap, or if they wanted to spend the night, they could sleep up there. Yeah.